art total, which is the total art concept, that you design furniture, you design tapestry, you design the fresques, the architect does everything A to Z, which is exactly the same case in Art Nouveau. And that's why it was considered a lot for the elitist, because it was too expensive. It was only, the haute bourgeois would commission Gaudi or Guima or Horta to build their homes. When I started to dig, it was striking how much it's similar. Look at the textiles in India. It immediately took me back to the art and craft movement in England. The Raphaelites, William Morrison. If you see in the museums, you see the archives, the umbis, the beautiful flowers, the Mughal gardens, the same vocabulary of colors that Horta used are strikingly similar in the Frison house. During World War II, he fled to America and he burned a lot of archives. So that is a big dilemma that we don't have in writing, how this inspiration came to him. But since he was, moving in these expositions, meeting these kinds of people, so it's only obvious because the witness is right in front of our eye. It's these beautiful homes that are standing tall after century, seen 2 World War. The house was occupied by the Gestapo, and they painted, the first layer was by them. So since 100 years, nobody knew what was under these layers of paint. Can you imagine? So it's also been a revelation for academians. So it's evoking a lot of questions, both the sides. And what I find it interesting is that it's becoming a discussion. We're talking about it. It's not gathering dust under the layers of archives, museum, or archaeological surveys of the world, that it has become something that people are asking questions about. Did Horta go to India? This is the first question the visitors ask me. I said, well, I have to visit, somehow see the phantom of Horta to ask him the question. But I think he was totally inspired because it's so striking when we connect all the dots. It's really like a jigsaw puzzle. And what is also unique is that you see a lot of Masonic symbols. He was part of Freemason, and a lot of the symbols were used from the Rig Vedas, the Puranas, the Upanishads, So that influenced the thought, the academians or the writers or the scientists or researchers, somehow or the other. So it was not very naive that it's just coming from the top of the head. Inspiration has a lot to do with India and its history. It's just that we have never given the intellectual credits to India.
You're absolutely right, and some of the sort of research that I've also done indicates that, there's a famous book, Grammar of Ornament by Owen Jones, and of course, he's British. But that book became very popular in the 19th century, and he sort of documents, and he's one amongst many people who do that, and I'm sure there are many French authors also possibly books, and it becomes a style guide to be used by architects and designers, and there were many such publications at that time that probably played a big role, along with, of course, the expositions. Right? And the expositions become this sort of space where you discover the world without having to travel, without having to, across the seas and the oceans. You are able to experience the visual richness, the material richness of the world at your doorstep. Right? And there were so many exhibitions, as you said, the 1851 Great Exhibition in London, and it sort of also became a bit competitive.
Yes.
In the late 90s.
The next one? Then it was in Munich and in Paris, and also let's not forget Barcelona.
Yes.
Because Gaudi is like a god. Yeah. And right now there is an exposition on his work in Musée d'Orsay. So if you guys have time, please do look at it, because that is a completely different vocabulary of Art Nouveau. And that's what is beautiful, because they all had their own different versions.
So one of the things that the research also shows that it was not just objects and artifacts that traveled, to the expositions, but there are also artisans, I believe, who came. And, it sort of makes you wonder whether during the time that the artisans were at the exposition, whether they, had some commissions. But as you said, there's no way of knowing because the archives are lost. But it's quite possible, and I've found sort of examples, especially there was the famous 1883 colonial Indian exhibition in London, and the artisans who traveled, including weavers, and jewelry makers from Rajasthan, and there was actually a reconstruction of a gateway based on Rajasthani architecture, which still exists in Brighton. And these artisans as well did get some commissions while they were there. They worked on different projects. So it's not just objects and things, but people also traveled.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you see south of Spain, Andalusia, Granada, Sevilla, or even Venice or Turkey, it's exactly through the East India Company, through the Silk Route. There is so much of richness of craftsmanship that went on both the sides. We had Portuguese, we had French, we had Dutch, we had the British. Everybody came to India, So it's obvious when you see, for example, in my faculty, there is a really interesting subject on ceramics. And ceramics in Portugal are absolutely beautiful. And then you go to some heritage houses in Goa. And that's, right an example right there. And similar is also if you go to south of Spain and then you see Maison Frison, it's exactly the same Ottoman, Mughal structure of the Winter Garden. So it's very similar, but it's difficult to say and pinpoint which artisan traveled when. But it was very normal for, the old families in India to commission companies and artists from here to build palaces in India as well. For example, Baccarat, Val Solombaire, Christoffel,